Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now I will begin the evening Dharma talk, and I start in the usual way with the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. And so everybody who has been on this retreat has been working very hard today, and I congratulate everybody who's endured through most of this first day of the retreat. So we still have 3 more days to go in which we will be developing this practice to the successive levels, different taking in different aspects of the foundations of mindfulness. And in this talk today, I want to speak about the benefits of practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But as a way of approaching this topic, I first want to speak about the benefits of Dharma practice in general. Like, what is the purpose of the Buddha's teaching? What are the benefits that come from following the Buddha's teaching? And in a book, an anthology that I compiled called In the Buddha's Words, I used as the framework for collecting the Buddha's discourses a scheme of 3 types of benefit that are mentioned in the Pali commentaries, but we can also trace these to the canonical texts themselves. So these 3 benefits are the benefit that one experiences in this present life itself, which we might call the well-being and happiness here and now. The second benefit is the benefit pertaining to the future life. And so the benefit that we experience here and now, this kind of benefit doesn't really require any framework of belief, any framework of, say, doctrine calling for belief. But this is something which is practical, pragmatic, that when one takes up Buddhist practice, whether it's the ethical practice, the meditative practice, the understanding principles of Buddhist doctrine, like the 4 Noble Truths, or the 3 characteristics, one could apply those teachings in ways that are very clear and immediately visible, immediately experiential. So in the verse of homage to the Dhamma, we say that Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko, that the Dhamma is directly visible, it's akaliko, it brings immediate benefits, and ehipasiko, it invites one to come and see for oneself. So to get these benefits of the practice of the Dhamma, you don't have to have any belief in any kind of continuation of consciousness beyond the present life. One doesn't have to have a belief in the operation of karma and its fruits, but just when you take up these teachings, observing precepts that enjoin a life of harmlessness, of restraint, of honesty, of truthfulness, of sobriety, one could see certain clear benefits. And when one takes up meditation practices, for example, the practice of loving kindness and compassion, or altruistic joy. Again, this brings happiness and benefit that one could experience directly for oneself right here and now. And also, those particular practices lead to harmonious and fulfilling relationships with others through observing precepts, developing the Brahmaviharas, these divine qualities of universal love and compassion. We experience deep joy and fulfillment within ourselves. Our relationships with others become more peaceful and harmonious, and we're able to transform the direction of our life if we're motivated by those qualities from one of self-seeking, just seeking one's own personal benefits of wealth, power, position, status, and so on. Developing these qualities motivates you to work in ways that will bring benefit to others. And when you live in a way that brings benefit and good and happiness to others, that brings happiness within oneself. And even the wisdom teachings of the Buddha, for example, the three characteristics, impermanence, dukkha, non-self, even though those teachings are, the intention behind those teachings is to show the way to ultimate liberation, but we could adopt these teachings, adopt those principles, and apply them in ways that will be beneficial to ourselves in this life itself. For example, we take just the teaching of impermanence. So the mind naturally tends to grasp upon some kind of notion of permanence, that things are going to last forever, that the possessions, that our own personal possessions will remain stable and enduring, that the people that we love, that we're related to, that we're attached to, will continue to live forever. But things break down, things perish. Our own status in life can change. You lose your job, you lose your wealth, or a loved one passes away, whether parents, partner, children. Okay, so if you don't have a teaching like the teaching on impermanence, when you lose the things that you love, that you're attached to, then you become plunged into the mood of misery, even despair. It seems like the entire world has just collapsed upon you, and you have nothing to turn to, no refuge, no sense of support in your life. Everything is just become it's like a chasm is opened up underneath your feet. But if we take the teaching, if you have some understanding of the teaching of impermanence, then when things change, especially when they change in unfavorable ways, ways that cut against your desire, it doesn't mean that you don't feel disappointment, sorrow, or even grief when you lose a loved one, but by applying the teaching of impermanence, you're able to accept, ultimately to accept these changes. You know that this is the nature of life, that nothing remains stable, that everything is in a constant process of change and transformation and becoming, and all relationships are bound at some point to come to an end. Like one of the themes of reflection that we're supposed to do regularly, almost every day, is Sabbehi me piyehi mana pehi nana bhavo vina bhavoti. That at some point there must be parting and separation from everyone and everything that is dear and beloved to myself. And so when you have some understanding of this principle, when you lose your cherished objects, your cherished position, or your beloved partner or relatives, then naturally you're going to feel sorrow and grief, But when you apply this teaching and reflect on this teaching of impermanence, of parting, of separation, then you can reconcile yourself to this truth of life, this fact of life, and you could live with some degree of tranquility, equanimity, and acceptance of the way things are. So that is the way some of the principles and practices of the Buddha's teaching bring benefit here and now in this present life itself. But according to the Buddha's teaching, the death of this physical body, the perishing of this physical body, doesn't bring a complete end to the life process. According to the Buddha's teaching, consciousness is a process, not an entity like a soul, but the process of consciousness continues beyond the death of this physical body and takes up a new form of existence in one or another of the different realms of existence. So the Buddha's cosmology has many different realms of existence, and consciousness moves on after death to a new embodiment. It takes up a new mode of existence in one of these different realms of existence as determined by our karma. The karma is, you could say, the pathway that leads to different realms of existence. And what the Buddha's teaching does is to shed a light on the different pathways of karma leading to the different realms of existence. It's like we are traveling, maybe we're like travelers who have come to a new town. We've driven through the countryside, we come to a town or a little city, and we're not familiar with that town or city. If there are no street lights, we can't read the street signs. I'm supposing we're driving in the age before the invention of the GPS. Now with the GPS, you could be blind and you still get the right directions. But if you come to this town or city, no street lights, you can't read the boards showing the names of the streets and the avenues, and so you don't know where to go, how to reach your destination. But when there are street lights at night illuminating the boards with the names of the streets and the avenues, then you can look up and you see, this is that avenue, I have to go turn left here, then I have to drive so many streets, and then I come to a right turn here, and in that way you can reach your destination. And so we could say that the Buddha's teaching shines a spotlight. It illuminates the different types of karma. The different types of karma are pathways, roads leading to different destinations. And so we want to avoid those pathways that lead to disaster, to lower forms of rebirth, and those would be the unwholesome or the dark courses of karma, the courses of karma that sort of ferment in the mind and propel the stream of consciousness to an undesirable, unfortunate type of rebirth in the lower realms. And then we want to follow the bright courses of karma, the beautiful or wholesome courses of karma that can propel our consciousness upward to desirable and fortunate realms of existence. So that is the sort of second benefit of the Buddha's teaching. When we have some knowledge of the teaching, some understanding, we know what are the courses of action to be avoided, to abstain from, and what are the courses of action to engage in, to follow, to fulfill. And that way we could help to ensure ourselves of a good future destination in the next life. And until we reach the final goal of arhatship, we're going to take a new existence. At least that's what the Buddha's teaching tells us. And then the third aim, the third goal of the Buddha's teaching is liberation from the entire cycle, this beginningless cycle of repeated birth and death. And so what the Buddha teaches is that this cycle of repeated existence has been going on through beginningless time, And so in some suttas, he says that as we've been roaming and wandering through this course of existence, through this round of existence, we've shed tears more numerous, larger in quantity than the waters in the ocean. And we've left behind piles of bones greater than the mountains, the big mountains. And so the ultimate goal for the Buddha's teaching is to break free from this round of repeated existence and gain the ultimate goal, which is the unconditioned state of nibbana or nirvana, the state of final freedom from birth, old age, sickness, and death. And according to the Buddha's teaching, what sustains and drives the round of rebirths are the unwholesome mental states, which we call kilesa, defilements, like the sometimes called the fetters, or the asavas, the outflows, or the influxes, or the bonds, or the floods. So various names for different groups of these unwholesome mental states, but the most basic among them are craving and ignorance. And so to gain ultimate freedom, we have to uproot craving and ignorance, or sometimes expressed as the three unwholesome roots of greed, aversion, and delusion. Greed is roughly equivalent to craving, and delusion is equivalent to ignorance, and hatred is that factor which is especially responsible for the unwholesome actions that bring the bad rebirth. Okay, so how does the practice of the four foundations of mindfulness contribute to the fulfillment of these three goals of the Buddha's teaching? Okay, so first, and I think what's clearest to us and most easy to verify for ourselves is that the methodical practice of mindfulness, of a meditation practice, which involves the systematic practice of the development of mindfulness, brings the benefit visible here and now in the form of peace, first inner peace and tranquility and mental balance in facing the challenges that we encounter in the course of our lives. And the way this works is, the way the mind normally works, first consider the way the mind normally works. Usually we have 5 physical sense faculties and the inner mental faculty. And these sense faculties are constantly being bombarded by sense objects, and the mind faculty is exposed not only to the outer sense objects, but also to the mental objects that swell up from within ourselves, thoughts, memories, images, projections, imaginary constructions, and so forth. And so as the sense objects impinge upon the mind, either through the senses or inwardly through the mental faculty, they stimulate the arising of the defilements. These defilements, even though their ultimate function is to bind us to the round of samsara, but these defilements also cause turmoil and suffering in this present life itself. So the primary defilements, we would say, are greed, hatred, and delusion, or lust, aversion, and ignorance. So when the mind is impinged upon by pleasant, beautiful, attractive objects, those objects stimulate attachment, greed, desire, craving, and then attachment and clinging to the objects of desire. The disagreeable objects, the repugnant objects, provoke aversion, dislike, a desire to escape from the disagreeable object, or if we're looking towards the future, fear of disagreeable experiences in the future. So we have aversion, fear, worry, anxiety in relation to the disagreeable objects. And so in this way, the mind is usually sort of revolves in this cycle of aversion, of attraction and aversion, attachment and repulsion, liking and disliking. And that has the effect of causing disturbance and distress inwardly, causing direct inner discomfort, anxiety, trouble, distress, but it also makes us a source of trouble for others, even at the individual level, the level of personal relationships. When we're driven by greed and aversion, then we get into we relate to others, try to exploit others, utilize them for our own advantage, or we get involved in conflict with others, especially a person, say, who's dominated by anger and hatred. When they come into contact with others, then the natural result is that it leads to hostility towards others, aggression, and creates very disagreeable relationship, not only for oneself, but for the people who come within your sphere of influence. Okay, so the mind is sort of driven by greed and aversion, creating conflict in one's relationships with others on a one-to-one basis. And then when we have whole social groups in which the driving factor is greed and aversion, then it leads to social turmoil at the collective level. We see this in this country, the United States, in the explosion of racism, hostility towards immigrants, the polarization of the country between the political parties, and particularly the rise, maybe the most worrisome, of these extreme right-wing organizations and militia groups, and the explosion of violence, in gun violence, by people with disturbed minds. Okay, so the practice of mindfulness is a way of working inwardly upon oneself to regulate the functioning of the mind so that we are not responding automatically to the influx of sensory impressions. So naturally, sensory impressions are going to impinge upon the senses and upon the mind. Thoughts will come flowing into the mind, but through the operation of mindfulness, the application of mindfulness, we're able to stop at the sense impression and not superimpose our own projections upon the sense impressions and then create artificial mental constructions that we relate to by way of greed or aversion. But through mindfulness, we receive the sense impressions, but then we stop at the sense impression. And so when we see a form, we know that we are seeing a form. When we hear a sound, we know that we are hearing a sound. If we're eating food, we know that we are eating food and tasting the food, but we just register the sense impression without reacting to it automatically, without letting those sense impressions trigger a response. And in that way, we can respond when we have to respond to the input of our interactions with the world. We're able to respond with wisdom rather than with the automatic drive of greed and aversion. We're able to respond, to relate to others with kindness and compassion rather than with judgments, with assessments, with the attempt to exploit others or to damage and harm others. So developing mindfulness helps to first to regulate our relationships, our responses to the input of the senses and the impressions that swell up within the mind. And also, as we develop in the practice of mindfulness, and this is what I've been finding more and more recently, it has the effect of what I say is stripping away all of the false impressions that we create about ourselves, the false images that we create about ourselves. It's a way of returning the mind to the state. There's an expression that I've come across actually in Taoist literature. It's been translated as the uncarved block of wood. That is a block of wood in its original native condition before that block of wood has been carved into a statue, into an image, or into some piece of furniture. It's just a bare block of wood. And so our minds create various images about ourselves. We dwell in our projects, our undertakings, our ambitions, and we lose the anchorage within our own inner depths. And so the practice of mindfulness has the function, at least one of the functions, of stripping away all of these false images, these artificial, fictional selves that we create about ourselves, and returning us to what I would call the bare simplicity of our own inherent nature. And if that will differ very much for different people, just like we take, say, the direct disciples of the Buddha, all of them were masters of the four foundations of mindfulness, the great Arhat disciples of the Buddha, but they have very different characters, probably resulting from their impressions, their mental formations over their many past lives. So we see Sariputta is one who is distinguished by wisdom, and he is a very humble and gentle character. Moggallana has a very powerful character, even a bit, we could say, almost aggressive at times, a forceful character. And then Mahakassapa has a very austere and dominating character. So different characters, but all of them are functioning from that base of their own inherent wisdom, which emerges and flourishes through cultivating the practice of the four foundations of mindfulness. Okay, so these are some of the immediately visible benefits of the practice, the systematic practice of mindfulness. But now we want to consider the benefit of mindfulness in relation to our movement towards our future life. Okay, what governs, as I said, what governs the transition from one life to the next is our karma. And the factor that's responsible for a good rebirth is said to be merit. We use the word punya, which means, or punya karma, meritorious karma. And the practice of mindfulness itself is, of course, a very powerful, wholesome karma, a very powerful source of merit. But I don't want to consider the effectiveness of the practice of mindfulness from the angle of its generating merit, but from a different angle. That is, what determines the course that we take as we move to the next existence are primarily our habitual mental formations. That is, the karmic formations which we create through our actions, bodily and verbal actions, and through our thoughts and emotions. So if we let the mind be overrun, and overpowered repeatedly by the defiled states, greed and hatred, conceit, envy, competitiveness, rivalry, stubbornness, doubt, worry, arrogance, and so forth, those kinds of thought formations are going to create the pathways or impressions in the mind that will pull the mind downwards towards an unfortunate rebirth, towards a rebirth in the lower realms. Whereas if we generate mindfulness and then we use that mindfulness as a basis for developing beautiful and wholesome qualities of mind, especially the practice of generosity, loving kindness, compassion, and insight, wisdom, then those mental formations will conduce to a good or fortunate rebirth. Of course, people can practice generosity, observe precepts, even develop kindness and compassion without the methodical practice of mindfulness. But the methodical practice of mindfulness clears the way, clears the field for strengthening the beneficial impact of the development of generosity, kindness, and compassion. And so the two work together. Mindfulness, on the one hand, opening the way, opening the road, so to speak, and then our practices of generosity, kindness, and compassion, developing the strong, wholesome forces leading to a better rebirth, to a happy rebirth. Okay, but the ultimate goal for the practice of the systematic practice of mindfulness is the third goal of the Buddha's teaching. That is liberation. And we see that expressed at the opening of the Satipatthana Sutta, where the Buddha says that these four foundations of mindfulness are the direct path, or the one-way path, leading to the purification of beings, to the achievement of the true path, the right path, and to the realization of Nibbana. And how does that happen? How does the practice of mindfulness contribute to the purification of beings? The practice of the four foundations of mindfulness, first of all, contributes to the development of samadhi, concentration, or samatha, calmness, collectedness of mind. And then when the mind is calm, focused, and collected, through the methodical practice of mindfulness, we attend closely, carefully, persistently to the process of experience in its actual immediacy. And as we attend to the process of experience, we come to see directly with our inner eye of wisdom. We see that all the factors of experience, bodily factors and mental factors, are subject to arising and passing away. This is not just the coarse impermanence that everything that arises eventually ends, but at every moment we see it with, I would call this microscopic precision, that all of the factors of the body are constantly arising, and then as soon as they arise, they just stand for one moment, and then they break up and pass away, just like bubbles of water, or bubbles on the surface of a water. So all the factors of the body, all the mental factors, feelings, perceptions, volitions, and even the consciousness itself are arising and breaking up and perishing. And that brings the insight into impermanence. And through that insight into impermanence, one comes to see that all of the factors of this complex of the five aggregates, all of these factors of experience are in some way defective, unable to fulfill the mind's yearning for some base, stable base of happiness and security. And in that sense, we say that they are dukkha, which we usually translate as suffering, but it doesn't mean that all of these factors of experience are painful or immediate suffering, but they're all defective or deficient, unsatisfactory. So they're impermanent, they're dukkha, and since they're impermanent, we are unable to take them to be a substantial self, to be the basis for attributing to them the characteristic of being mine, I, or myself. So in that way, the practice of mindfulness, coupled with concentration and with clear discernment, clear comprehension at a very deep level, brings the wise insight, the panya, which sees into the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta. In the words of the Dhammapada, sabbe sankhara aniccati yada panyaya pasati atta nibindati dukkhe asamago visuddhya, that all conditioned phenomena, that is, all the phenomena of the five aggregates, are impermanent. All conditioned phenomena are dukkha, defective, unsatisfactory. And so one sees this with wisdom, and then one turns away from all conditioned phenomena and directs the mind to the unconditioned, which is nibbana. And that becomes asamago visuddhya. That is the path to purity, to purification. So that is why the Buddha says those four foundations of mindfulness are the direct path to the purification of beings, to the overcoming of suffering, to achieving the true noble path, the full eightfold path, and to the realization of nibbana, the ultimate final goal of the Buddha's teaching. So in this way, the practice of, or the development of the four foundations of mindfulness, we could see, contributes to bringing benefit and happiness in this life itself as we purify our own minds, improve our relations with others at an individual level and in society as a whole. It helps to develop the wholesome mental states that will contribute to a fortunate rebirth and thereby to well-being in future lives. And then by developing these four foundations of mindfulness, we're able to develop the wisdom that leads to ultimate liberation. So when we undertake this practice, as we've been doing today, just following the breath in and out, or doing the walking, mindfully taking the steps back and forth, don't think that this is a trivial matter, but just a way of passing the time in a peaceful, enjoyable way. But as we undertake this practice, we are working to purify, to cultivate, to ennoble our own minds, and we are walking that direct path, that one-way path that the Buddha speaks of as leading to the ultimate goal of his teaching. Okay, so thank you all for your attention. And now we have an extended break period. And again, during the break period, continue to try to maintain the meditative frame of mind. Don't think, I have a break now, turn on the news, what's happening? How are the banks doing? What's happening with the president, with Congress, with the presidential campaigns, 2 years away, but already the horse race has begun. But try to keep the mind calm. You could take a walk if it's warm enough where you are outside. We'll just relax. And then we will be back at 7 o'clock. And before we do the evening meditation, I'll set aside about 10 minutes to take some more questions that might have arisen. Not about my talk as such, but about the practice. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, this is bad mindfulness. Bad monk. Yeah, I'm so used to having Venerable Mangala here, so I get up and get my break. Yeah, let us do, since I've been talking for 45 minutes, so 5:15, 5:25, 5:25, let's take a little 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and at 5:25 Eastern Time, then we will do the chanting. Okay. Okay, so everybody should be back in their seat. And so we'll be doing the evening chanting. It's actually almost entirely the same as the morning chanting, just the sutta is different. Okay, so again, sort of we do 3 half bows to the Buddha from your sitting position. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we begin with the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijacharana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro buddhisadhamma sarati satta deva manusanang buddho bhagavati namo tassa samma sambuddhassa. Ye cha Buddha atita cha ye cha Buddha anagata pachupanna cha ye Buddha aham vandami sabada nati me saranam manyang buddho me saranang varang etena sacavajena hotu me jaya mangalang uttamangena vandehang padapangsu varuttamang buddheyo kalito doso buddho kamatu tammamang Buddhang yavanibana pariyantang saranam gacchami. And then we do a salutation to the Buddha. Then homage to the Dhamma. Swakato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko akaliko ehipasiko opanayako pachatang veditabo vinyuhiti. Namo tassa niyanika dhammasa ye cha dhamma atita cha ye cha dhamma anagata pachupanna cha ye dhamma aham vandami sabada nati me saranam manyang dhammo me saranang varang etena sacavajena hotu me jaya mangalang uttamangena vandehang Dhamman jati vidang varang Dhammeyo kalito doso Dhammo kamatu tang mamang Dhammang yavani vanapariyantang saranang gacchami. And then we salute the Dhamma. Homage to the Sangha. Supatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Ujupatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Nyayapatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Samichipatipanno bhagavato savaka sangho Yadidang Chatari Purisa Yugani Atta Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sango Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttaram Punyaketang Lokasati. Namo tassa atta ariya pugala mahasangasa ye cha sangha atita cha ye cha sangha anagata pachupanna cha ye sangha aham vandami sabada nati me saranam manyang sangho me saranang varang etena satchavajena hotu me jayamangalang uttamangena vandehang sangham chatuviduttamang Sangheyo kalito doso Sangho kamatu tang mamang Sangang yavani panapariyantang Saranang gacchami. Then salutation to the Sangha. Then the homage to the three symbols. Vandami chetiyang sabang sabatane supatiti tang saririkadatu mahabodhing buddharupang sakalang sada imaya dhamma nudhamma patipatiya Budang pujemi imaya dhamma nudhamma patipatiya dhammang pujemi imaya dhamma nudhamma patipatiya sanghang pujemi. Okay, now we scroll further down, keep on going down, till we get to the evening sutta. It'll be the Metta Sutta. That's it. Okay, this is it. Okay, so this is the Metta Sutta, the Sutta on loving kindness. Karaniyamatta kusalena yang tang santang padang abhisamecha sakho ujucha sujucha suvacho cha samudu anatimani santu sakocha subarocha Appakicho cha salahukavuti Santindriyo cha nipako cha appagabbo kulesu anugiddo na cha kudang samachare kinchi yena vinyupare upavadeyung sukino va kemino hontu sabbe sata bhavantu sukhitata ye ke jipana bhuttati tasava tavarava anavasesa digava ye mahantava majjhima rasakanukatula ditava yeva adita ye chadure vasanti avidure bhutava sambhave siva sabbe sata bhavantu sakhitata naparo parang nikubeta nati manyeta gatachinang kanchi pyaro sana patika sanya nanya manya sadukamicheya mataya ta niyam putang ayu sa ekaputang anurakhe evam pisa babhutesu manasang bhavaye aparimanang metancha sabalokasmin manasang bhavaye aparimanang udang adocha tiryancha asambadang avedang asapatang titang charang nisi nova sayanova yavatasavi gatamido etang sating aditeya brahmametang viharamidamahu diting cha anupagamma silava dasanena sampanno kamesu vinayagedang nahi jatu gapaseyang punareti etena sachavajena sotite hotu sabada etena sachavajena sabarogo vinasatu etena sachavajena hotu te jayamangalang sabityo vivajantu sabarogo vinasatu mate bhavatu antarayo sukhi digayuko bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba sanganubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Then the sharing of the merits. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang akasata jabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Emina punyakamena mame pala samagamo satang samagamo hotu yava nibbana patiya idang me punyakamang asavakaya vahang hotu sabaduka pamuchatu te. And then we go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And then we could stand, and we just do 3 half bows in the standing position.
Three half bow to the Buddha. Bow to Bante.
Okay, so now we have now we have our real break. Okay, so please continue to try to maintain the mindfulness through the break period. And then we'll be back at 7 o'clock, and then we'll take a few more questions, and then we go back into our sitting and walking meditation.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante. Take care.
Thank you.
Many meditations, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thanks, Bante.